Rangers fans, welcome to Liberty Blue, the essential New York Rangers podcast. I'm Andrew Chelney alongside Nick Zararis, and, well, Nick, game 2 is tonight. How about that?
I was talking about this with somebody yesterday at Gov Ball, one of my friends, and she goes, "You're sick to your stomach because you know the Rangers could have beaten the Oilers." And I said, "Yes, correct." And that's really the conundrum I know a lot of Ranger fans are walking through in the stages of grief. Not only did we have to put to rest the best Rangers team since 1994, we also have to grapple with the fact that they were never going to have an easier opponent in the Stanley Cup final unless there was another pandemic and they were somehow in a weird division where they got to play only teams in that division until the Stanley Cup final. So, barring that, I think there are a lot of Ranger fans who are looking around right now who just want a sense of direction, who want to get, even if we're not ready to start talking specific players, transactions, they want to know what's next. They want to know where can we improve, what can we change, and because our general manager is not the articulate type, he plays everything very close to the chest. You can read that a few different ways. I read that as he doesn't want to accidentally tip anything, so he would rather be just absolutely opaque entirely. So I understand it. As a messaging strategy, as a public relations tactic, it's pretty much impossible to glean anything from anything Drury says. He's not John Cooper or Mike Sullivan up there talking about the most intricate and detailed minutia. Instead, I think we're operating in the dark, more or less. I think nobody has a great pulse. I think being that different publications and different reporters have gotten different scoops when it comes to the Rangers, I wouldn't take any one entity as the gospel. I think we all need to understand we still got a few weeks till free agency opens, got a few weeks till the draft. So right now we're kind of in a vacuum of information.
And by the way, use Cap Friendly while you still can, because the Capitals have now bought it.
Yes, and don't worry, that organization, a lot of thoughts about Ted Leonosis, but as far as the Rangers are concerned, we got to wait. And I know this isn't exactly the most patient fan group, but my counterpoint to that is we've waited 30 years. What's 2 more weeks?
It's one of those situations where, and I tweeted this out earlier today, that safe is death. And that's
a little too David Goggins. Take one step back from that. Not death.
Well, in terms of overall success, you can win regular season games, and that's awesome. But when it comes to the most important times of the season, are you going to make the decisions that are going to lead your team to Stanley Cup victories? That was kind of the theme this season, where coming in, the thought process was, okay, the Rangers could get a forward-thinking, fresh coach like Chris Knobloch. They could go and get fresher players at the deadline that, could actually fill out that top 6 winger spot. They could try to put some chips in that, for players that have more than one functioning hip that could actually benefit this team both offensively and defensively. They could figure out a way to finagle the defense and maybe get Zach Jones in or find some other ways to do that. They chose the safe route. The entire for a lot of the season, Peter Laviolette gets a lot of credit. There's a lot of good things that he did. A lot of the Rangers' managerial decisions were safe. And what we're seeing right now, especially when it comes to the Stanley Cup Finals, where we have a coach like Chris Knobloch, Philip Broberg, who by all accounts should not be, but if you ask most coaches in the NHL, should not quote unquote be playing in the Stanley Cup Final. Like he was essentially thrown out there and said, "All right, go. See, we'll see what you got." And he's been pretty damn good, I'd say, in this run so far. Chris Knobloch has done that. Now in game 2, he scratched Cody Ceci, their worst defenseman. Now, I'm not out here saying that Vinny Desharnais is this fantastic black ace that the Oilers have. That's not what I'm suggesting. But what I am saying is that it's way less about playing Vinny Desharnais and way more about punting Cody Ceci to the moon. So, but that's not safe. But at the same time, it's not safe, and the Oilers are still playing. and the Rangers are not.
Knobloch's playing with house money. That's the difference. Peter Laviolette knows he's probably got 2 years before everything falls apart. I think that's part of the reason we talked about it a lot last summer. Why Knobloch, why Jay Leach, maybe some of the more younger Spencer Carberry. Some of those guys might look at the Rangers as, I've got 2 years to win a Stanley Cup or I'm getting fired no matter what. I think somebody like Peter Laviolette is probably a lot more comfortable with that proposition because Peter Laviolette's been in that situation where he's gone to places and it's only lasted 2 or 3 years. I think a guy like Knobloch, a guy like Carberry, a guy like Jay Leach, they understand this doesn't go right for me. I got to go back to being an assistant for at least 3 or 4 years if I want another crack. Like hell, look at Dan Bilsma. It took him 7, 8 years to get another head coaching job. And that was a guy with a cup. It took him 8 years to get another crack at it. So I can understand the reservations in that respect. But as far as the Rangers and playing it safe, I wrote about it last week.
You did.
And
it was a great article, and if you have not read it, I implore you to do so.
Thank you. The main takeaway I have from the way they played the trade deadline and the way they played the regular season, I do think there's a part of me that thinks Drury realizes the team isn't as good as they prop it up to be. I think the fact they were unwilling to part with a prospect who may or may not be ready to play in the NHL for another 2 or 3 seasons tells me that they know that in 2 years or so, they're probably not going to be a very good team. They realize that 2 years from now, you're looking at a core of Zibanejad, Trocheck, Lafreniere, and that's really kind of it up front. You'll have Schneider, you'll have Fox, you'll have Keandre Miller, you'll have Shesterkin. Kreider, Panarin, unrestricted free agents 2 years from now. Trouba, unrestricted free agent 2 years from now. Gaudreau, unrestricted free agent 2 years from now. I think 2 years from now, when Gabriel Perreault will probably be ready for his first full NHL season, I think that's why he wasn't as willing to part with him as, say, maybe some of us were. And I think whether you want to call that self-preservation and recognizing, hey, this might not go too well for me, and I need to look out for me, or if you want to look at that as long-term planning of not needing to bottom out again, I think there's a little bit of both in there. I think it's a little bit of Drury recognizing this group is pretty good. I think if we play our cards right, we can definitely win, which I still think if they got a few more bounces, if they got a little bit luckier, if Fox is healthy, they're probably playing right now. But be that as it may, we can't give benefit of the doubt. At this point, everybody's going to be a year older. You're going to have to give some guys raises, and it's only going to get more expensive from here because Lafreniere played himself into some decent money.
Yep.
Keandre Miller may not have played himself into decent money, but based on the other restricted free agent contracts for defensemen and based on the fact everybody's getting $5 million in free cap space because the cap's actually going up a reasonable amount, the price of the brick's going up. At this point, it's not going to get any easier from a team building perspective. And I think the Rangers are staking a lot on guys like Brett Berard, guys on Brendan Othman, Gabriel Perreault. You can throw Edstrom in there. You can throw Zach Jones in there. They're staking a lot on their ability to seamlessly transition those guys pretty much right away. Because if not, then you're telling me the window's closed. Because that's the thing. If you want to bring those guys in, that's fine. But if you're staking that much, we're talking like 4 or 5 guys in your 18 skaters. We're staking 5 spots in your starting 18 on entry-level contracts, being able to hit the ground running right away. That feels like a team that's not a Stanley Cup contender. And then at that point, why did you hold on to Gabriel Perreault? Right. That's really the risk assessment there.
This is one of those situations where we talk about it in this ethereal concept of the pendulum swinging one way or the other, where last season the pendulum swung one way. They got Kane because of his resume and not because of what he could actually do. They got Tarasenko, who by all means was a good addition, especially for the price they paid.
They only had to give up picks. That's the other thing.
They didn't give up a whole lot to get him. So that trade was good by all accounts. But they got the name brands, or at least who Drury thought was a name brand. Of course, Patrick Kane. We've talked about him to death, and we won't mention him again. And that completely fell face first. So Drury, in some regards, and now I don't know if he did this, did he think this through as he did it or not? No one knows for sure. But the pendulum swung the other way, and he played it super safe. This offseason was super safe. They didn't want to give up any real picks, any real prospects, anybody of importance. They got Jack Roslovic, who was a nothing burger for the role that they wanted for him to slot in, and Alex Wenberg, by all accounts, was a decent third line option. He was, he did his role well, but the problem is that their number one issue, besides the blue line, but that's a whole different conversation. Their number one issue they never addressed. They thought they did with Roslovic, but he was never suited for that role, so I kind of don't know why Drury thought that was going to be the option. Was he the backup to somebody? I know they wanted Pacioretty. That kind of fell through. But even Pacioretty, I don't really know why you thought he was going to be the first-line right-winger option. That was kind of a strange decision. A lot of questionable things have taken place over the last couple of trade deadlines, and that to me signifies that Drury is very, very aware of what he has in the cupboard, but it also says to me he doesn't know what to do with them, because he knows that the core is aging and they haven't won anything, Stanley Cup wise, and they're not getting any younger, and they has these contract issues. Okay, well, if you knew you had so many of these issues, then why not part with some? I'm not saying clear all of your cupboards out, get 9 new players like Vegas did, only to get bounced in the first round. That's not what I'm suggesting. But if you knew that this was one of, let's just say one of your best chances of making it far in the final with this current core, with a team that broke regular season records and wins and all these things, why then did you not do any of that? Now, we weren't in the room with Drury. I'm sure he made offers, and I'm sure he talked to a bunch of other teams, and you need to, at the end of the day, you do need to tango. Other GMs have to want to trade with you in order for you to get somebody back in return that you like. But I would have to imagine that if you dangle an Othman, a Perreault, a Berard, a Robertson, or somebody of that nature, that GMs that are selling would like to acquire some of these people. So it's a very strange couple of deadlines here, and it's a very pendulum swingy type of couple of trade deadlines for Drury that makes me kind of question: does he know what he wants to do with this core?
Something I was thinking about over the weekend, and I'll say it now, I think he's waiting for that next big free agent opportunity. I think that's the plan. And I don't know how smart it is to kind of stake keeping a window of contention open on the guy getting to unrestricted free agency
and wanting to come here.
Because this isn't the NBA. Let's just be frank here. I mean, sure, Draisaitl could become a free agent next summer. Is he going to get there? Sure, McDavid could be a free agent 2 summers from now. Is he going to get there? Can you willfully stake your, job on the opportunity that someone may become available, you having the cap space to make it happen, and them wanting to come? And then, at that point, you're talking about a very different team. I think, based on the way they're playing this, I really do think that's their gambit, that 2 years from now, when Panarin, Kreider, and Trouba are all off the books, that's almost $25 million in cap space. They will have the opportunity to push chips in on whether it's Draisaitl next summer or McDavid the summer after that, or a restricted free agent, and you get a Matthew Tkachuk type situation where they mention the Rangers as a landing spot, and now we have this bundle of assets. We have this Perreault, we have this Othman. We're going to actually start to have a cupboard of draft picks because we don't have to give them away to make bad contracts go away. I'm not saying that's definitely what the plan is, but based on the prioritization they're having of keeping all of their prospects, I think that's the long-term plan here, because they're not going to be able to seamlessly integrate those guys. That's the thing.
I want to interrupt you here for a second, because that makes sense in the context of how the team plays the sport. The team is and we talked about it a little bit less so this season, but especially the last couple of seasons prior to this one, where everybody was calling them power play merchants, where the thought process was, we're just going to hang on, and then we're going to rely on outside sources, be the refs / the other team taking penalties, and we're going to jump at these opportunities in order to win us hockey games. That thought process, if let's just say what you're saying is what Drury is thinking, that checks out, right? Because now you are employing the same philosophy that you have had as a hockey team. Now the managerial staff also apply it, where we are going to hang on as best as we can with the core that we have and not going to tinker too much. And we're going to hope that outside sources, the big free agents, the big tickets, whether it be free agency or maybe, disgruntled players that want trades, we are going to hope that they want to come here. It all makes sense from a jigsaw perspective of, okay, this is my thought process, and I want the team inherently, funnily enough, plays the same way.
I mean, that's been my active thesis of the organization for the better part of the last 10 years. The Rangers don't want to do the hard work. They want to retcon other people's successes onto their team, and then they're left confused as to why it doesn't work. That's been their MO for a long time, that they struggle to develop their own high-end talent. And you look at the core of this team: Trocheck, other place; Zibanejad, other place; Kreider, in-house, obviously; Panarin, other places; Trouba, other places; Adam Fox, Harvard, thank you. Other than that,
Again, thank you to Adam Fox's dad for making him a Rangers fan.
Yeah, especially as someone who grew up on Long Island. Could have been the other way. Could have very well been the flotation device Lou Lamoriello very much needed to keep that team relevant. But as far as the Rangers, this is the issue that happened after 2021. They wanted to get other people's success. They bolt on a Stanley Cup winner in Gaudreau, a Stanley Cup winner in Blais, somebody who's been to a couple finals in Reeves, without understanding what made those guys successful. We're using successful very loosely in some of those cases, but successful in those other places. And then they were mystified why it didn't work in 2022, why they lost to Tampa Bay. And then they had to make some of those guys go away. Now we're sitting here 2 years later, and the question is, do the Rangers understand where they need to improve? And can they still improve? I got to sneeze. Hang on. You could talk.
I mean, the question, the answer to can they still improve, it's a loaded question, because you take a look at the regular season stats. When you break, this franchise has been around for 98 years. When you break point records and win records, and then you follow it up with can they improve, it's a difficult question to answer. But on the flip side, I would much rather they lose 5 more games in the regular season if that meant long-term playoff success. If they win 50 instead of 55 or 48 instead of 53, it's like, obviously, in the moment, we're going to be like, oh, well, why didn't they win those games? Sure, game to game, we're going to be critical and analyze every good thing that they did, every bad thing that they did, etc. But over the course of 82 games plus the playoffs, if you're not far and away the best team in the regular season, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to win the cup. It's not as if this is the NBA where the Boston Celtics have won 64 games. Yes, they had a pretty easy path to the final, sure, comparatively to the Mavs, but they look so good that no matter what they do, they win anyway. Like in game 2, not to make this a basketball podcast, but Doncic had a great game. The Celtics didn't shoot the ball well, and they still won. None of it mattered. The Celtics were still the better team. They won despite despite them not having the best game 2 on the planet.
They have more room for error.
Exactly.
Celtics.
Yeah. They had such, their starting 5 is so much better 1 through 5, and they filled the necessary holes that that were gaping open when they lost to the Warriors 2 years ago. They brought in Drew Holiday, who is one of the best defensive forwards in the league. You brought in, Tingus Pingus, Kristaps Porzingis, the 7'3", I think, or 7'4" behemoth, who's having a really great, season for them. They saw, okay, we had this list of problems in our last run, on top of, a little bit of an experience here and there, whatever. We are a little bit older, we're a little bit more experienced, but also our team is so much better that nothing's going to stop us. And hockey is a different sport because there's, again, hockey is the only sport where you can shoot a puck from 35 feet out, it hit off of 8 ankles and go in the net, and then you win the Stanley Cup because of that. Like, no other sport has that inherent luck factor. But at the end of the day, if you don't look at your roster objectively, you have to throw out names, you have to throw out contracts, you have to throw out what they did in the past. It doesn't matter. You have to, as a general manager of an NHL team, you have to assess your roster and say, okay, player A did really well. This is what they did well. This is what they didn't do so well. Here's what we can do to mitigate that. Player B had a miserable season. We have to find some way to move on from it. We have to find other ways of managing the situation. If you throw out names and just look at what they did on the ice, you are going to build a better contender based off of the decisions that you make. I understand these are human beings, they're not just numbers, but we are talking about specifically on-ice contributions. I understand that Barclay Goodrow won 2 Stanley Cups, and he had a heater against Florida. My man was scoring on every shot that he was taking. But you take that ridiculous shooting percentage aside, he still got caved in. He was miserable on that fourth line. And at a certain point, Chris Drury has to look at his roster and say, okay, I understand that these guys have had success, past tense, success on other teams, and they've done all these great things. But on this team, they have not been good. How can I address that so the team gets better as a whole? Until that happens, we're just going to be yapping.
I agree. I think the important question that we need to ask, simply put, is why. It's not just what happened, it's why did it happen? Yeah. And I think that's something the Rangers have struggled with at times. I think they have been, I don't want to say reactionary, but I feel like they haven't been proactive in their decision-making. Some of the salary cap decisions over the last 2 years, not doing paper transactions to bank more cap space. That's just, I don't want to call it laziness because at the end of the day, it's about getting those guys paid at the NHL rate as opposed to the AHL rate, which I'm sure does help them when it comes time to negotiate eventually. Like now when they're going to sit down with Schneider, they'll bring up the fact, hey, we took care of you. We could have papered you to Hartford over and over again, and you would have only gotten, $4,500 as opposed to your NHL minimum. But the Rangers cannot afford to be worried so much about the how. It is why. Why were we so good in the regular season, but in the playoffs, why did we struggle? Why do guys we bring in from other places who have success in other places struggle when they get here? What is the disconnect, and why aren't we figuring out how to get the most out of these guys? I said this yesterday on the Oilers pod in regards to some of their bottom 6 guys like Ryan McLeod, Corey Perry, etc. There are no such things as untalented hockey players. If you get to the NHL, you have to be good at something. Even if that's just being big, you still have to be able to do something with that. There are plenty of 6'5" guys working in warehouses right now, lifting heavy-ass bricks and moving lumber around.
Sure.
There are a lot of big, strong guys who can't skate, who are not in this league. It is incumbent upon a coach to be able to identify how I can get the best out of somebody. And something I did today, earlier, I just, time on ice, I think part of the reason you're probably not going to see significant change this offseason, other than the fact they don't have a ton of money to play with.
By the way, somebody on YouTube just said, not true. Tanner Glass was here.
Tanner Glass got to the league.
He did.
He got to the league. Somebody saw something in his profile.
Hey,
somewhere along his path.
Tanner Glass had that top cheddars snipe on Carey Price. Yeah. Lest we forget. I'm not saying he had an incredible career, but what I am saying is that my man's embarrassed Carey Price for a split second, and it was glorious. That's all I'm saying.
Hey man, he parlayed that into a job.
Yeah.
There are a lot of guys who weren't particularly good hockey players, but their institutional knowledge was valuable enough that a hockey team felt compelled to hire them. I think part of the reason we won't see meaningful change, at least this offseason, is that the guys you would want to change play too big of roles. Ryan Lindgren, 1,400 minutes. I don't think you're finding a defenseman who's going to play 1,400 minutes, kill penalties, and ride shotgun with Fox, unless it's an internal promotion of Miller. And based on the way they've handled Miller over the last few years, I don't think they're ready to do that for whatever reason. I think they haven't given Miller enough runway to kind of figure out who he is as a pro, and he's been lobbed on to somebody else. And they've said he's talented, he'll figure it out. And until they give him the amount of runway he probably needs to play with a Fox, to maybe run a second power play, I don't know if he's ever going to get where we all think he can get. And without that, you need a first pair left defenseman. I'm under no illusion they're moving on from Lindgren. Everything we've read, even though I qualified it in the first 5 minutes, everything we've read is that they're going to work on a long-term extension. That's based on what we've heard, what we've read. Things could change. Signing Lindgren tells me they don't think. Signing Lindgren tells me they think they're pretty close. And that's the key here. If they keep.
Well, if you think you're pretty close, then why not make actual trades at the deadline if you're so close?
I agree with you. I do agree with you in that respect. But part of the reason I don't think we're going to see that big change is they think they're close. And why do they think they're close? Because they have the regular season. This is something I mentioned in the thing I wrote last week too. If you win 54 games over the course of 6 months, 54 out of 82, you had a really good season. Then why couldn't you win 16 out of 28? 16 out of 28 is easier than 54 out of 82. 54 out of 82. Why is it more difficult? The styles of play are different. The quality of competition is a lot stiffer. I do think the Rangers' unwillingness to recognize the differences between the two and talking about the functional uses. And this is what I understand what Larry Brooks keeps writing in his columns. The Rangers do need to get bigger and they do need to get more imposing, but it needs to be functional. It can't just be guys who are big. Somebody's going to give Dakota Joshua $5.5 million a year this year because he had 40 points and like 18, 20 goals this year for the Canucks. Dakota Joshua is a good hockey player. The reason he's valuable is the Canucks weren't paying him anything. The minute you pay a guy like him, remember when the Canucks gave Jay Beagle a big contract right after the Capitals won the Stanley Cup? You are not going to slide a guy who is on the third or fourth line of a good team onto your second line and get the results you think you are. The Rangers learned this firsthand. They did this with Barclay Goodrow. He played, I want to say, the 5th most minutes of anyone on the team in 2021, 2022, which is just lunacy for somebody who was a career, 10th forward. You might think, hey, he was good at this. If we give him more minutes, the points are going to go up. In theory, yes. That's ignorant of what makes a guy successful. And it's largely why I don't think the Rangers are going to recognize the problem here. They think because of the regular season results they get, they can keep doing that in the playoffs. And there's no better illustration of this than Zibanejad. Zibanejad puts up respectable counting stats. I want to say he's like 18th or 19th in points over the last 5 seasons. He's a good player. Don't get me wrong. Zibanejad's a really good player. He can be on a team that wins a Stanley Cup. He's not a fatal flaw. The way he plays the game is not conducive to playoff hockey success. Everybody, I know the one defense I've seen a lot of people make for him in the last 2 weeks is, well, he's focusing on defense. Well, if he's focusing on defense and they're still losing the minutes, and I know they were only on the ice for, I think, 1 goal against at 5-on-5 against Florida. If they are losing the minutes he is on the ice because they are focusing so much on defense, I would rather you concede some defense trying to make offense. Until the Rangers accept that proposition that they're going to need to concede defensively, which is why they need to get a better defense, they're not going to, the calculus is not there for this to work. We talked about it before. You mentioned it in regards to the Celtics. They have a lot of margin for error because they have a really talented lineup. The Rangers do not have a ton of margin for error. They averaged 2 goals a game against Florida. They were never going to win a series against Florida when they were only scoring 2 goals a game. They just weren't. It's really difficult because right now they don't have a lot of flexibility. And I don't know if they recognize what the limitations of their team are.
And that's kind of just the double-edged sword of this managerial staff is, okay, well, if you think you're close, then why didn't you make trades at the deadline that actually made your team, more than marginally better than what you had? And if you didn't think you were close, then by all means, there has to be sweeping changes. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't just get close every year and have that be your default. Oh, we're really close. All we need is to make one or two little changes and we'll be right back to where we were. Well, that's kind of the problem, is that you're maintaining the status quo, which is a good regular season, which is, fine. But, and again, like, I don't, a lot of teams would love to have the success the Rangers would have. All these conference finals runs and making it to the playoffs, and like, that's great. But the ultimate goal is to win a Stanley Cup. I never want to hear a story about 94 again. I've had it. I'm so sick and tired of it. I want a new one. We were not alive for 94. 94 was 30 years ago. The Rangers, and you said it, last week, the Rangers have won Stanley Cup since World War II. Like, it is time.
Since America entered World War II. You gotta,
yes.
The history nerds will correct you.
Yes. Like, it is time to change that. It is way past time. And also, the Rangers were hapless when there were 6 teams in the league. Like that. Like, come on, you can't do that. Like, this franchise needs more than just runs to the cup. It's all great. It's all fine and dandy, but this franchise is their expectations has to be higher than, oh, we're getting the conference finals. This is fine. It can't end this way. So you're getting to these conference finals. That's great, but why are you not getting further than that? Chris Drury and the entire managerial staff, and Pierre Laviolette, I'm sure, has maybe not the most say, but I'm sure he has more than, zero. I'm sure he has Chris Drury's number, and I'm sure they text every now and again. I'm sure there's some kind of line of communication between the head coach and general manager. At a certain point, you have to ask yourself, okay, you're getting to all these runs. Why is this team not getting further? Why is this team still getting caved in at 5-on-5 a lot of the times against better teams? Why is the blue line struggling at times to get the puck out of the defensive zone? Why do we have to keep relying on Igor Shesterkin to bail us out? Time is a flat circle. The Rangers did this with Lundqvist his entire career. He was spectacular. He carried these guys on his back, the entire team, further than they had any right of to be. And you know what? At the end of his career, he never won the cup. And at the end of the day, if the Rangers don't learn from their mistakes, they're going to be right back at it with Igor Shesterkin.
I want to amend one thing you said. I think there is a world where consistently making the playoffs every year and eventually getting it right. I do think that is a strategy. You look back last decade, the Blues pretty consistent in the playoffs for much of the 2010s, the Capitals much of the 2010s, the Lightning the entirety of the 2010s. They only missed the playoffs, I think, twice in there. I do think that's a viable strategy. I do think it becomes a concern when you're not making changes. And I don't want to play, devil's advocate or use the outlier as the example, but Tampa Bay, maybe the biggest egg on face moment in the modern NHL, losing to the Blue Jackets in 4 games in 2019. The calls to modify or change the core of that team, they weren't right. They needed to tinker on the margins and they needed to get better. The difference, and the reason I don't think the Rangers should do this and why that's kind of the outlier, that Tampa Bay team, at least 4 future Hall of Famers. The Capitals, 2. I think Backstrom might eventually get in, but Ovechkin
I think he
assuredly.
should.
He probably will. It might be a little bit tough. He doesn't have a lot of the benchmark stats because he's missed some time, especially over the last few years. But
He's one of the most underrated players.
no,
In
definitely,
our
definitely. I mean,
generation.
I mentioned it in the column that the Rangers' inability to find that first line center. If Zibanejad was as good as Backstrom, why doesn't Kreider put up 45 goals every single season like Prime Ovechkin was doing? And I understand Prime Ovechkin very different. But if Zibanejad is as good as a facilitator and as good defensively as we are told, where is it? Where is it against the other team's best?
Yep.
And it's frustrating because the Rangers are not far away. And
Yeah.
we started this conversation 35 minutes ago with the idea that there's a whole lot of us right now that feel like the Rangers could beat Edmonton. There are a whole lot of us that feel the margin in that Florida series wasn't that far. It was 16-12 on goals. 2 of those 4 goals, empty netters. 14-12 in all situations for goals. That's not a big margin. We're talking about 1 power play goal and 1 even strength goal over the span of the 4 games they lost. And they at least get to a game 7, if not win another one of those games. So when the margins are that small, I think that's where you have the contingent, the national media in particular, that feels that the Rangers aren't that far away, so they shouldn't change anything. I joked that you would think they only looked at the box scores, the old HPJR tweet. That's kind of what it sounds like from
It
everybody.
really is.
Because if you
Yeah.
watched the Rangers play Florida, the scores were close. It took the Rangers slowing those games down into a rock fight where Florida had the puck 70% of the time. And the only offensive creation the Rangers had was off of the rush. If the rush opportunities were not there, the Rangers would dump the puck in, or they would get one singular low quality scoring chance, and that would be the end of the shift. I don't know what the solution is. This isn't like the last 2 years where I felt you find the right supplementary pieces, you elongate your lineup a little bit. You go back, I think it was the 3rd or 4th episode of the show we ever did. I was pounding the desk for Evan Rodriguez for $1.2 million.
Oh yeah.
That's the type of bottom 6 forward the Rangers need to be looking for.
Yep.
The one who is cheap. Do not tell me the solution to the Rangers' problems is Jonathan Marchessault at $7 million for 4 years. Do not tell me the solution to the Rangers' problem is Tyler Bertuzzi or Max Domi. Those guys have use until the Rangers address the fact that I think it's 3rd most commonly used center, it's forward, 2nd most used center in Zibanejad, just isn't at that threshold you need your 2nd or 3rd best forward to be at. You go down to the defensemen. Trouba and Lindgren are, I think, 2nd and 3rd most commonly used. Yeah, 3rd and 4th. I forgot Miller's 1st out of all. But Lindgren and Trouba, your 3rd and 4th most used defensemen. Those guys are playing 1,400 minutes each. You have to find ways to make those minutes better. That is a large portion of your available minutes. That's like 30% of your entire season's worth of minutes.
Yeah.
Until the Rangers recognize that it's not just the margins. The only way you can convince me that tinkering on the margins is going to improve this team is if there's no fluff. If they entirely overhaul the bottom 6 and it's only functional guys, there's no Rempe, there's no Gaudreau, there's no Brodzinski. I'm talking like quality bottom 6 guys, like we mentioned, someone like Rodriguez, someone like Jimmy Vesey. If it's only guys like that, okay, maybe you can convince me the Rangers can get by without the overwhelming star power at the top of their lineup. But the Rangers are not going to do that. They're probably not going to overhaul their entire bottom 6. If there was a willingness to say we're going to go into next year with our 3rd line being Cooley, Hedel, Othman, and our 4th line, or even Kakko with Othman, and then you bump Cooley down to the 4th line with Vesey, and then you figure out who your 4th line center is, and you get Brett Berard in there somewhere too. If you were going to tell me that was the plan, and they were going to put Jones in the Gustafsson spot, and they were going to find the replacement for one of Lindgren or Trouba, okay, Lindgren and Trouba play a lot of minutes. That tells me, okay, we understand the problem. But even then, you are still going to be at a disadvantage most of the time because when you get to a conference final, the other team has multiple Hall of Famers on it. Florida, Barkov more likely than not is going to end up in the Hall of Fame when all's said and done. Matthew Tkachuk, the pace he's on right now, he's probably going to end up in the Hall of Fame. Bobrovsky, if they win the Stanley Cup, is a guaranteed Hall of Famer. Right now, he's likely a Hall of Famer. That's 3. The Rangers have maybe 1 right now in Panarin, and that's only because he gets the benefit of the aging curve, not coming over till he was older. He's not going to hit any of the benchmarks. It'll be about really high peak. Adam Fox, if he stays on this trajectory, yes. Shesterkin, if he stays on this trajectory, it'll be tricky because he's probably not going to play long enough to get to the win totals that you probably need. But the Rangers guys don't play the most impactful thing. Of those 3, Fox is probably their most important skater, and Shesterkin's their most important player. Barkov, Kachuk, Verhaeghe, Bennett. You need to find another guy in that mix.
Yep.
I know I jokingly had said this a few weeks ago. The solution to this problem is not to finally fix your cap problems by getting rid of Trouba and Gaudreau and then giving all of the money to someone like Marchessault or Stamkos. That is a 1-year solution. If you want to give Steven Stamkos $11 million a year for 2 years, you're probably not getting over the hump with him as your first line right wing. Stamkos is a great player. He does not address the Rangers' issues. Yep. He is a good player, but it is ignorant of why he is successful to bolt him onto this Rangers team and think, okay, we got a good player. Why is our team not good enough? That's the issue here for the Rangers. They have good players, but they're not good enough, and they don't entirely complement each other.
Here's the thing. Bringing in Stamkos would fix one or a couple issues. That's fine. But you're not addressing the root issue of the Rangers have more than a couple of these issues, and if you bring in one guy that takes up the vast majority of what little room you had to fix the other problems, if you take if you have a small hole and you fill it with a massive plug, but you have no more plug to fill the rest of the holes, what do you okay, well you're overcompensating. You're fixing this one hole, sure, good start, but hey, the boat is still sinking. We should probably fix that, right? Oh, that's right, I forgot we have no more materials because we used all of them to fix that other hole that we had. They have to get to the bottom of the core issue of why this team continues to not go all the way. Why? If you win all these games, if you like to think that you're a great team, where is it? Where is the success? It comes down to, you beat a bad Washington team, fine. You almost threw a series against Carolina. Thankfully, Chris Kreider in the third period of Game 6 said, let's not have that happen, and had a period of his life. Also, Franny Anderson, miserable. That helped along the way. They have to really sit down and remove the additional pieces of information from the objective performances. The second they stop looking at prior resumes and how many rings somebody has and whose wife really wants to come here and all these things, that's when you really figure out who's a good hockey player and who's not. Now, I'm not here to suggest that players don't have, these are still a human sport. We're not playing NHL 24 here. There's still a lot of human aspects and human relationships and all these things. And I'm not here to suggest that that's unimportant. But what I am saying is that you can't let that impede you from making your team better and on the correct trajectory to win the Stanley Cup. I'm sure Jacob Trouba is a great guy. If you can find a way to remove him and his ridiculous contract from this team and tangibly fill that hole with a better player, you have made the team better, objectively. And you go up through this lineup, and we can go through it, all these names, and hopefully that's what Chris Drury is doing and saying, okay, names are great, resumes are great, rings are great, leadership awards are great, all that's fantastic. Did player A have a good season? Yes or no? Why? Okay, player B, did they have a great season? Yes or no? Why? When you do a full-on analysis of a team like that, now you can actually get more so into the root cause of why a team is successful and why a team fails. Until that happens, this is going to be the topic of conversation.
One thing I will amend to that and add on, I should say, the reason the Rangers are prioritizing non-measurable things is because those are things that the prices fluctuate on. Goals and assists cost money. Leadership does not cost money. Anybody technically can be a leader. Anybody can rise to an occasion. Goals and assists cost a lot of money. Jonathan Marchessault is going to get a life-altering amount of money as a free agent. Steven Stamkos is going to get another life-altering amount of money contract. The guys at the top of free agency who provide meaningful change, who are true impactful players, those guys are expensive. It is always going to be cheaper to get a fourth line forward who can win some faceoffs and may have won a Stanley Cup in another place. The problem the Rangers have, and I made this joke earlier, is that they're always grocery shopping when they're hungry. They feel, oh, I kind of wanted Oreos. Okay. Oh, chips. I would like some Chips Ahoy too. Fig Newton. Yeah, I'll take some Fig Newtons too. And before you know it, they've left the grocery store with $75 of crap and spent $10 on actual food they could prep throughout the course of the week because they were hungry. They weren't thinking rationally. They were thinking with a glimmer of desperation. And until the Rangers address the fundamental issues which stem from their star players' preferred style of play, they are going to have a very difficult time manufacturing a successful Stanley Cup final run. It's not impossible, it is very difficult. The Rangers, if they are going to ever break through, they can't just look at what other teams are doing and say, let's do that. They need to understand why they're working.
Yep.
I know the prevailing takeaway right now, and I saw Elliot and Merrick talking about this earlier today on Merrick's show, is that the big depth forward is going to have a good summer. You know, someone like Stefan Noesen, Jordan Martinook, Dakota Joshua, based on the premise of someone like an Evan Rodriguez in Florida's bottom six, or Sam Bennett, who I know plays second line, but same idea. Those guys are successful because they complement what Florida does stylistically. Florida wants to forecheck, they want to cycle, and they will grind you into a pulp. Bolting one big forward who has a little offensive instinct to his game is not going to fundamentally change your team. The Rangers learned this firsthand. They thought Blais, Gaudreau, and Nemeth were all they needed to go from good to great. And they got the best goaltending season since they got the best goaltending season since 2008, and they played most of that season without a functional third or fourth line. Again, you don't want to lament the past, but instead of Ryan Reeves, if that's forward X, you know, when you're talking about against a great team, okay, how can we improve that much? But in the aggregate, the big picture, until the Rangers' best players get better, which Zibanejad's 30, Trocheck's 31, Kreider's 32, Panarin's 33, Trouba, I think, is 29. I don't think you're getting meaningfully more production. And that's my one concern. I don't want the Rangers to think what they did last year was replicable. It's not. You are not going to be as good next year. Basically impossible to be as good as you were this year.
You broke records. Like you can't break more records with this. Like, I mean, I guess like in a vacuum you can, but
how many records can my records break, Kobe Bryant?
Right, exactly. Like you can only break your own record so many times with the same team. If you break records and then you roll back the same exact team and you're like, oh well, just go break more of them. How difficult could it be? Yeah, okay. You try that. Get back to me. See how that goes.
Until the Rangers find a way to alter their roster, they're probably peaking here where they are right now. If that's in part of a larger strategy of not having the bottom fall out 2 years from now, and I think that's really where I'm at. I think there's a genuine understanding that more likely than not, once they pay Shesterkin, they're probably going to have to take a step back just to make the money work. They're probably going to have one lean season in there, probably the first year of Shesterkin's new deal, where they're probably going to have to shed some salary and the roster is just not going to be as good. They're going to bank on a lot of the young guys that we've spent a lot of this episode talking about as, chips in a potential trade, because they don't want to have to trade, expiring contract Chris Kreider or expiring contract Artemi Panarin 2 or 3 years from now, the way they did in 2018. If everyone's healthy on that 2017-2018 Rangers team, if Nash, McDonough, Zuccarello, Hayes, JT Miller, if those guys are healthy, that team makes the playoffs. There's not a doubt in my mind.
And if you do make a trade, could you make it just a little bit better than what you ended up with that McDonough Miller trade? That I know
it's a real stinker.
I know it was salvaged a little bit with the picks and all that. Oh man, was it a terrible trade for the Rangers? It was one of the worst trades in franchise history. That's how bad it was. You give up that kind of value, and yeah, you get a couple of picks, they pan out for you and all that. But for the talent that you gave up, you got a whole bag of nothing. You were left with, it's like somebody gave, I think it was Jeff Gordon at the time. Somebody gave Jeff Gordon a briefcase, and it was like, there's a lot of money here. Trust me, bro. And Jeff Gordon never opened the case. And then when he got the trade, opened the case, and there was an Arby's coupon in there.
Again, that is a great example of the Rangers taking other people's credibility.
Yeah.
They said, okay, Tampa Bay drafted these guys. They have to be good. Yep. Tampa Bay, everyone they draft is good. We're going to bring them into our system. We're going to drop them in. Brett Howden played an entire season as a 20-year-old and was one of the worst players in the entire league because he wasn't ready to play at the NHL level. The Rangers didn't care. They did this with Capo Caco, who was one of the worst players in the entire league as a rookie. They did not care. Until the Rangers acknowledge that there's an active part of the why players are successful, there's a disconnect in the roster construction. I mentioned in the thing I wrote that the reason everybody was happy with Schneider is that he wasn't Trouba. Schneider didn't do anything particularly remarkable, but he wasn't as bad as Trouba was, so that gets him the benefit of the doubt.
Yep.
Why was Trouba brought here? Their best defenseman on the team was Mark Stahl. That's why Jacob Trouba was bought here. It wasn't, what did he do in Winnipeg so well that made him successful? It was, he's good at hockey. He had 50 points this year. Drop him in, and we'll figure it out once he gets here. That misunderstanding is why the Rangers are where they are. They have a good team. This is not saying making the conference finals twice in 3 years isn't good. But if their goal is genuinely to win a championship and not to just have a very long window, they're going to have to start making some of these difficult decisions and start genuinely assessing what's not working. Shesterkin, last year of being reasonably priced. I don't think they're in a position where they could conceivably say, we're going to trade him or we're not going to meet his asking price and let him walk. Their entire roster construction is predicated on having one of the 5 best goalies in the world. You take him out of the column for the pros of this team, they are not going to be nearly as competitive. Could they still be a playoff team? Yeah, sure. They could be a reasonably competitive middle of the pack team. You take away one of the 5 best goalies in the world, this team is not a Stanley Cup contender. You take Zibanejad out without a meaningful replacement, you are not a Stanley Cup contender. You take Chris Kreider out of this group without a meaningful replacement, you are not a Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah.
That's why I feel it's really risky to bank the rest of Shesterkin's prime, K'Andre Miller's prime, Adam Fox's prime on Brennan Othman, Gabriel Perreault, Brett Berard. That's why, as I said before, I feel like this has to be the long game of we're waiting for the big free agent to get there or we're waiting for the disgruntled restricted free agent to be there. Otherwise, this plan doesn't make sense.
Also, miss me, and I'm not talking about you, but they're miss me with the nobody can win if your most important player is your goalie making a lot of money a year. But the Panthers are in the final again. Bobrovsky's making $10 million a year. Miss me, please.
Outlier. I would argue that's the outlier. You can't bank on the outlier.
It is. No, I'm not saying that you need.
2 years ago, he got benched for 19-year-old Spencer Knight.
Yes, he did. And then he had a renaissance at age 34 last year. And then now he's been incredible again. there needs to be a case study on Bobrovsky. My man's was very up and down. Now the last 2 seasons he's been nothing short of incredible, which I don't know how you do that at 34, 35, but that's neither here nor there.
Because they don't ask him to do a lot. That's the thing.
Yeah, that could be one of the reasons
Until
why.
game
but
one.
Again,
Game one he was great.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead,
but
go ahead.
I'm not here to say that we have evidence both ways. We have evidence of teams that are really good up front and on the blue line and may not have the best goalie in the league, but they won anyway. We also have evidence of teams with really great goalies going all the way. I mean, Tampa Bay had Vasilevsky, who was one of the best goalies in the league, making a ton of money, and with him,
that was the second one.
Sure, but they still won one, right? Like they still won one with his massive contract. So like there's evidence for both sides of the table. I'm so over people screaming that the Rangers never won anything because of Lundqvist's contract, and they won't win anything because of Shesterkin's contract. Please, grow up. That's all I gotta say about that. Grow up, please.
I understand the reticence to pay a goalie. I do. The Rangers are not a team that is going to be able to reshape their roster if they don't have the elite goalie. That's the thing.
Yeah.
If they were in a position where they could change over a good chunk of their team, then we could talk about, hey, maybe giving Shesterkin the top of market goalie deal isn't a great idea. I think the Saros situation in Nashville, I think it will tell us a lot about what the price of a goalie is. And I think that'll give us some clarity on Shesterkin's number, because right now I would assume Shesterkin and his representation are going to say, Bob signed his deal 6 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever it was. We are better than he was. We are younger than he was. I have been here my entire career. I have been the best player on 2 teams that have gone to a conference final. My number starts at what Bob is at. I deserve more than that, but the minimum I'm taking is what Bobrovsky is getting right now. I think that's entirely reasonable.
Sure.
The Rangers are not in a position where they can say no to that.
Yeah.
Because of that, they're going to have to change some things. Next year, that's really it. Once you have to pay Shesterkin 10, 11 a year, it's not over, but the way you look at this team has to change. It just fundamentally does.
And which again goes back to how baffling this trade deadline was. You knew this was going to happen. It's not like Chris Drury didn't know that Shesterkin's contract was up in 2 seasons. Of course he's the general manager of hockey team.
Man, Cap Friendly's not going to be public soon. He's going to have an excuse. Yeah. He might have to use.
Yeah, he's got Puckpedia now in his bookmarks tab. But it's not a secret. You knew that this was the prime window to contend with people's ages and money and contracts. This was it. So if you knew, then show the work. Where is the work? I don't see it.
All right. I think that's good for now. Once we get more news, I think we can start to have a firm direction. But because we're kind of ambiguous until the season is over, I don't think it's constructive to start talking big picture, how to improve the roster, until we get an idea of what's going on with Lindgren, what's going on with Schneider. And that won't happen until the regular season is over.
We have the draft in 2 weeks?
2 weeks, yeah. But the Rangers, the most interesting thing the Rangers might do on draft night is turning somebody on their roster into a top 75 pick. In an ideal world, if you gave me the sticks for an hour, that's what I'm doing. I'm calling places like Winnipeg. I'm calling places like Chicago and asking, can I have the 57th overall pick for Ryan Lindgren, please? Because that's going to clear $4 million. It's going to get us an extra pick. And then we can either use that pick or we can turn that pick and other stuff into something bigger.
Yep.
Brady Tkachuk's not happening. Please shut the fuck up, for the love of God. I'm so tired of these people. The least creative people suggesting trades that have no basis in reality. That player's good. Yes, I want him on my team.
Sure.
That's the extent of the analysis.
Turn the console off, please. Real life is not be a GM. You can't turn the slider off, have the other team's GM accept all trades, and then just go buck wild. That's not how reality works. Get it together, please. I get the off season for the Rangers, and there's you have to fill the airtime somehow with these pieces and these thoughts. But can we, snap back to reality? Oop, there goes Rabbity. Like, figure it out. Like, come on, turn the console off. Go outside. Go touch grass, please.
Where are the Rangers getting $8 million to pay Brady Tkachuk? That's the other thing.
But they're just simply going to turn Jacob Trouba's contract into, a pile of Arby's coupons, and they'll send it to Ottawa. There you go. There's the deal.
Hey, Utah hockey franchise, I have a captain for you.
Oh, look at that.
He's going to cost you a second-round pick and will eat 25% of his contract, but he's a leader, and he will teach your young men how to be professional hockey players. That'll do it for this week's edition of Liberty Blue. Talk to you guys real soon. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, over on YouTube. Subscribe, alarm bell, get a notification whenever there's new content. Until the Rangers do something, or next month.